So I'm gonna just try to record a video about learning to burn as sort of the fundamental spiritual practice. It is the high road, the holy road, the direct path. And there's really kind of two phases. This is very Rupert Spira-esque, Spira-esque. I mean, not just him. This is precedes Rupert, but he really puts it in these terms, that there's sort of two phases of spiritual awakening, We don't need to focus too much on the labels, but there is the recognition of your formless nature, and that's sort of stepping back out of the layers of form, out of the layers of creation, into the unmanifest, pure awareness, pure consciousness, spirit, God, pure subjectivity. Subject without an object, the one without a second. And then there is the bringing forth of that formlessness into form, like the return journey of, you could say, emptying out the world of apparent objects, the world of apparent boundaries, dissolving that world until formlessness and form are one, and they always have been, always will be. There is no separation, actually. So all teachings really are partial. And how does Rupert put it? He says concessions to the mind, in a sense. You know, we need forms, we need methods, we need teachings to go beyond into what is formless, what is beyond concept, beyond teaching. And you don't need a lot, you know. There's just a few basic pointings that do basically all of the work. That's the good news, and it's not intellectual. It's not about how smart you are. It's not about acquisition of knowledge, which is good news or bad news depending on your psychological patterns. Some of us are some of our defense mechanisms rely on acquisition of knowledge. It's like, if I get just enough knowledge, I will be safe. I will finally have everything figured out. That can be one pattern. I recognize that one. And so those are kind of the two phases. Recognition of pure awareness, self-inquiry, coming into direct contact with one's I am, with I am itself. So you start to get into language games because it's not it's the one thing that can't be reified. We're talking about the ground of being. I've talked about this in some of the first videos I put on this channel if you want more information, but the ground of being is formless, eternal, unbounded, outside of category. And out of that, it's like the ocean, and out of that, the myriad forms, all the diversity of forms, apparent separate objects, arise out of that. It's like that ground state, that formless ground, stirs within itself and descends or emerges out of that. It takes on, you could say it crystallizes, it condenses, it individuates. But there's a descent out of formlessness into greater levels of form. Anyways, so the journey is in recognizing through direct experience, pure awareness, consciousness, with no objects as sort of a background. And I think for some of us, I definitely recognize it. Initially, you recognize it there's almost like a spatial dimension that it's kind of, you could say, back behind you in a way. People talk about the witness, that there's this capacity of consciousness. If you go far enough back, it's almost like just you keep cycling backwards, you keep refreshing your browser in a way. And you can touch into this just consciousness. There's no qualities to it. There's just awareness. I just had a little thing pop up on my phone advertising a Rupert Spira meeting. That's good timing. So that's really stage one, direct recognition. But then, and he is great with this, he's really a person to turn to with this, but you can just through direct inquiry into, your sensory experience, start to recognize the empty nature, the formlessness, the boundarylessness of all apparent objects, mental objects, inquiring into what is the nature of thought. Are there boundaries? What is its texture? Is it separate from awareness? It's like you come to recognize that the world of objects, creation itself, you can't find under close inquiry, direct inquiry, you can't find boundaries. You can't find where awareness, your essence, your true nature, can't find a separation. You can't find a boundary between awareness and contents of awareness. When you really get kind of careful and intentional about examining that, how far away is a thought from awareness? That's a good question to ask. When I zoom in on taste, the physical sensation of taste, what is the substance of that? Am I aware of that? I do seem to be aware that I'm tasting something. But without any labels, without any concepts around it, what is the raw data, the raw experience of taste? And just through that kind of inquiry, you start to open it up into this recognition that it's all empty. Sensations in the body, thoughts, images. When you just penetrate deeply enough with your awareness, you see that there's no actual boundary. There's no, that distinction always remains some kind of, has some kind of utility, and you can still, in a sense, kind of fall back into this formless state. At least this is how I experience it. You can still fall back into this formlessness, backward step. But as you come up through the different layers of density, you realize that their nature is not separate from that. It's like you're coming out of the depths of the ocean up to the surface, and it's all water. water being a metaphor or analogy for your true nature. But that's a very long intro to the idea that what we're doing in spiritual practice, after you recognize that ground state, is becoming more and more transparent to that ground state, to that grace, to that light, to that formlessness, to that peace, to that freedom. But we've accumulated layer after layer after layer of density, through repression, through, ultimately, I guess you could say in a word, through repression. All this energy from fear, from loneliness, from sadness, from anger, all the ways that we haven't been able to just kind of naturally express and complete the energetic circuits in our body. We have accumulated a certain amount of density, and so really the second stage has a lot to do with releasing, healing the shadow, transforming the shadow, bringing forth all that repressed material, letting it empty out, helping it empty out. All the apparent divisions and confusion and distortion. And so there's many routes to doing that: somatic body work and dream work, all kinds of different modalities of therapy. But the therapy, I'll just say that a quick side note on that. The therapy, as I see it, is good if it is leading you into the shadow material, and I would say at a kinesthetic, at a felt level, helping you to move that energy, heal that energy, cry and release that energy, transform that energy. If it's moving you in that direction, if you're getting those sorts of deeper releases, at emotional, at a feeling, at an energetic level. And I say that because talk therapy is not enough, can be a springboard into deeper experience. But if you're staying at the discursive level, in the mind, in the level of thoughts, you're dealing with a very shallow layer of your being, for one. But the neurotic thoughts and thought patterns are a sort of protective screen to keep you out of the uncomfortable depths, out of all that unprocessed material. And so it's like trying to heal the roots of a tree by putting bandages or rearranging the leaves. You're not going to get there through that. So therapy is useful. That helps you move, ideally in a skillful way, in a supported way, in a safe way, down into the feeling tone level. And I've done other videos on that, so I'll just leave it there. But the key therapy, the key thing, if you just want to cut through all of that, or that you may, as a result of doing different therapies and modalities, kind of a key heuristic, is that the right word? Or just a key refrain is learning to burn. Learn to burn. Learn to burn. And what I mean by that is you're sort of metabolizing. One metaphor is you're alchemizing or you're metabolizing this material that is frozen inside of you. You're working to unfreeze it and ultimately to burn it out, to metabolize it, to digest it. And and so the simplest way, not easy, but the simplest way is through surrender. Surrender is a synonym for learning to burn. Gotta feel it to heal it. That's another way to say it. And meditation is one vehicle for that. I have a lot to say about that. But after a while of exploring different meditative practices, trying to triage in my mind how much I want to say, because there's a lot I could say, but you may come to find after a while that you don't want to be a meditator. You don't want to just get meditation badges for having, mastered certain techniques, or that ultimately you use meditation as a vehicle for healing, for transformation, and that the simpler, the better. It's really not about being the most proficient, technically correct, expert knowledge on meditation. There's nothing wrong with that, and you definitely probably start out that way if you're really gung-ho or really suffering or just enjoy it. And there's also wisdom in meditation traditions, because there's so many ways that things can kind of go off track, so it's good to at least experiment with the form and to get a sense and to go gradually with this whole process. It's sort of hard to talk too specifically in these videos because you don't know if anybody is going to watch these videos, but you don't know at what level somebody is going to hear this. And I guess just as a general thing, you want to be safe. You always want to be safe, especially starting out, and you don't want to overdo it, and you can overdo it. I definitely have overdone it, and you probably will overdo it. That's probably just part of the path and the learning curve. But yeah, so maybe you experiment with mindfulness meditation, Vipassana, Zen meditation, mantra. There's just a lot of different flavors. But for the purpose of this video, let's just try to keep it simple. Kind of how I see meditation essentially is surrender. Meditation is a synonym for surrender. Surrender is a synonym for the phrase learning to burn, which is the same thing as stopping. And I've talked about this in a different video too, but meditation in the pure sense is just stopping. Now, stopping is not a technique. It's not a 3-step process. Stopping is stopping. It's just stopping. Being still. And it's not being rigid and being still. It's just surrendering. It's the ultimate posture towards God, towards the highest, of thy will be done. It's just surrendering. It's stopping. How do I do that? No, you don't do it. You just stop. You just stop. It's really that simple. And it's very radical. And the moment you stop, or you entertain the idea of stopping, you realize this entire fucking world is engineered in opposition to that simple, radical, non-technical decision to stop. All of our defense structures kind of have as a base movement. They sort of rely upon movement. You could almost see that biologically, that stopping is death. You have to be vigilant, right? You have to be on the lookout for predators. You have to keep moving. I don't want to sort of narrativize it too much, but just kind of giving a little bit of a context. But stopping is meditation. And I think that's what the techniques, if they can be useful, that's what they ultimately help you to do, is to stop. And it's at the most superficial level of your body, physically stopping. And that stopping just goes deeper and deeper. And again, it's an allowance. It's kind of funny that I think suffering, you read King James Bible, suffer the little children to come unto me. Suffering and allowance are the same. There's some kind of relationship there. They seem to be used, but that there's a deeper meaning to the word suffering, allowance. I don't know, I'll have to look into the etymology. But you will suffer. You're already suffering. This is really the liberation of suffering, but in an immediate experiential sense, you're going to suffer because you realize once you stop, you realize all the shit that you were running from. Why you're on the treadmill of thoughts, of actions, of relationships, of all this stuff, is because it's a kind of avoidance strategy for pain. Being kind of, for all the aversive, painful stuff we have inside of us, trauma, all the, negatively valenced stuff inside of us, all the crap that we're carrying around. And when you stop, the process of burning begins. And so kind of just a very basic way to make this a little bit more concrete. When you meditate, you get in a posture, in a more formal meditation maybe. Half lotus, full lotus, or sitting in a chair, but just at some basic level, you're not running around anymore, you're sitting. And so you start to experiment with, you'll notice that peace and bliss do not dawn immediately. But that you've got all these patterns that have a kind of energetic momentum, that are seeking their fulfillment in certain gratifications of the senses, of the mind, you could call this human nature, I'm convinced, the addictive self. If you've become very, entrained, not quite the right word, but just say if you become very trained to scrolling on your phone when you're bored or when you have some anxiety come up, you'll notice, excuse me, you'll notice those urges come up. But because you've got this commitment to stop, because you've decided to explore meditation as kind of a proxy for that commitment, and you're doing whatever, 5-minute, 10-minute meditation, start out, even a 1-minute meditation, you have decided, you know what, I'm gonna just sit this out and let's see what happens. Maybe to make just even a little bit simpler, so we don't have to get into a conversation about addictions and all that. When you meditate, you'll notice there's all kinds of just discomforts in the body. And let's say an itch comes up. So you're sitting there and you've got an itch on your cheek. Now it's interesting to notice that there's the itch, there's the feelings, there's the sensation. Then there's the satisfaction of the itch, the scratching of the itch, the relieving of the itch. And that at a basic level, you can see those are two different things. Now in a kind of less conscious way, just kind of automatically moving through life, you may not notice there's two things, that there's the itch, the urge, and the fulfillment of the urge to scratch it. But meditation helps you to start to slow down and to break things into different components of experience. And you see that there's kind of a chain of events. So out of just a rested state, somehow onto the screen of awareness comes this sensation that arises, maybe just kind of a whisper in awareness, and then it grows. And about the time it starts to get fairly loud, what you typically would do is just scratch it to relieve it, and there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. However, just as an experiment, and that's sort of what meditation can help you to do, is you experiment with your consciousness and your capacity to feel. You might at some point get curious and see, like, how long can I go without scratching it? I recognize there's that sensation there. And now the mind will, about this time that you don't move your hand and scratch it, your mind will come in and start to get a little bit grumpy or a little bit anxious, or start talking to you and tell you you need to scratch. It's not going to go away. It's going to kill you. Probably won't say that, but you just notice the relationship of the mind in this whole process of alleviation of pain and of urges, that it acts, A-C-T-S, it acts as a kind of, the word bully is coming to mind. I'm trying to see if there's a more neutral or better way to say that, but it sort of adds a little bit of fuel to the fire. It's another strategy for an urge to be satiated. The mind has a big role in that, and you can start to see that. But if your commitment is strong enough, and I'm using an itch just as sort of a relatively small, relatively trivial, relatively concrete example, but I hope the application, and I hope it's obvious how you can kind of generalize and universalize some of these principles when we're thinking about bigger itches and deeper kinds of urges on this path. But so you decide, I'm just going to sit it out and let's see what happens. The mind is barking at you. The itch seems to be growing in intensity. And you can ask, do I have the capacity to sit through this? I just noticed I'm itching now. But do I have the capacity to sit through this and see what happens? Does it just get more and more intense? Sort of like if you were to chart it on a bar, on a line graph, and this vertical axis, is that the x-axis? I can't remember. The vertical axis is the intensity of an itch, 0 to 10, and the horizontal axis is the duration of the itch in time. It's like whisper in consciousness, you're at 0, 0 on the graph, and it starts to increase. You can kind of run the experiment. Is it just going to increase? As y increases, does x continue to increase without any limit? Does it just keep going up and up and up? And so you run that experiment and you say, within a certain parameter of time, let's just see what happens. Do I have to listen to the mind? I hear the mind very much wants me to do this. And do I have to lift my arm? Am I utterly compelled to the point that there's zero choice? Do I have to lift my arm and complete this cycle? I can tell you the answer in advance, but it's a good experiment to run. And yeah, I mean, the answer is no. You don't have to. There is a capacity to just burn, to just let something like that arise. And you'll find that the chart, the line graph, eventually reaches kind of a crescendo, a peak. And as you stay, and there's a few tips I can give about this that are useful, and then it kind of tapers off. The intensity lessens to some degree, maybe entirely. It may not go away entirely right away, but the intensity lessens. Now, some shortcuts within this, if you want to be less passive, I mean, that's kind of just the full surrender. If it's going to kill me, it's going to kill me, but let's see what happens. Another thing you can do is zoom in with your awareness. It's like our awareness is this, you can toggle between a very broad awareness, it's like an aperture of a camera, or you can bring it in very tight. You can focus your awareness on the sensation in your cheek or wherever the itch is, and you can investigate. You know, if you were to put it into words, it's not really a discursive or verbal investigation, but it's something like, what is the substance of this itch in actual experience, and just go directly into it, directly into the itch, the sensation. And you might find it's kind of got this, again, it's not verbal, but if you were to put it in words, it starts to become more a language of energy, of pulsation, of frequency. It becomes more kind of abstract. And so you go into it. People always say when they talk about this, you know, you get curious. And that word doesn't quite do it for me, because when you're in any state of suffering, even if it's something mild like an itch, it's not really, you know, curiosity usually happens in a more peaceful, anyways. But you penetrate with your awareness just to see what actually is this phenomenon. Touch it, go directly, like your attention is a laser beam, where it becomes so fine that you can go in almost at a molecular level, and you sort of penetrate into it. You inhabit the sensation from the inside, and that can itself sort of help to dissolve. It's like putting heat on ice, like a laser beam on ice or something. It starts to thaw out, break apart, break open. Again, it's the metaphor of, you know, getting a massage and somebody using their fingers in the same way you use your awareness to bring focused attention and energy into a knot in your body and your muscles, and that starts to open it up. and heal it and release it. So you can investigate directly. If you don't want to just sit there kind of passively burning, you can go directly in and investigate and see. One thing you can discover is just its substancelessness, its emptiness, its formlessness. That ultimately it is comprised of light, of energy, of awareness, spirit, of God, you could say. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is just anchor in your body and just kind of the energy field of your body, or just the felt sense in your body. And breathe. And sometimes you need to shake your body if you've got urges coming up. So those are techniques. I'm trying to keep it very simple because you don't want to see, every form casts a shadow. I can't remember who told me that, but it's very true. It's like out of the infinite potentiality of existence, experience of God, the moment you have a form is the moment there's going to be a shadow. Now you can have forms that are more or less open and transparent and cast less shadow, to very rigid forms, very dense shadows. But I just say that because every method, every technique, every teaching you get from anybody it's like the moment you limit universal potentiality, you sort of have to account for there being a shadow. So every teaching is going to have a shadow side. So every method is going to, it's like, I think Ram Dass said something like that. Every method can entrap you. And so it's not about acquisition of methods. It's not about mastering methods. It's about using forms, and ideally simpler forms that are more transparent, easier to shed, and the more simple, the more transparent it tends to be, the less shadow. But every form can be a trap, so you have to always be aware of that. But because you don't want to be a meditator, you want to be free. But these vehicles, the vehicles should lead you in the direction of surrender. And once you've come to that state of, I can just surrender, I can just drop in, I can just stop, then you're there. That's all you need, is just ultimately to be able to stop. But when we've got such strong habit patterns and urges moving inside of us, it's kind of good to have a container like meditation and a practice, and that can be a helpful first kind of scaffolding in the direction of surrender, in the direction of stopping. Because what the stop is, what the meditative commitment is that every itch that comes up, and that's why I tried to use that as a metaphor. You have every itch that comes up, all these urges that come up, and all these, it's the same process. You've got something uncomfortable inside you that comes up, and how you typically scratch that itch is you go into an addictive pattern to relieve that. And it's a temporary relief, and it's a relief that kind of only tightens the grip of the addiction. Unfortunately, it's a counterfeit liberation. If it's drinking alcohol, if it's relationships with people, if it's whatever it is, internet addiction. But it just sort of reinforces that pattern. It's a counterfeit liberation. And so the real liberation is is interrupting that cycle of the itch coming up and the recognition, do I have to complete this cycle? The mind will tell you, yes, you must do this. You will die or suffer or whatever. The mind has no shame. It'll tell you whatever it needs to tell you to convince you that you need to complete the addictive pattern. But when you start out small with something like an itch, then you get the template. That's what's important. You get the template and you start to experiment and apply that at deeper and deeper levels. And it's not a rigid thing. It's not about rigidly not doing something or white knuckling. It's about surrender. It's about stopping physically, just relaxing. That's another word. You relax, you let go. You know, meditation can look like laying on the ground, supine, laying on the ground in the fetal position. You want your body to be comfortable because the nervous system mediates a lot of this. So the more comfortable your body is, safe your body feels, the more likely that some of this material is going to come up. And when these patterns come up, the true healing of them is not the completion of the circuit, but the transformation, the releasing of the pattern, because underneath the itch is typically pain, or kind of intermixed with it, but underneath that, so there's a fragment of yourself, of your experience, trauma, or an inner split that this pattern is kind of holding and perpetuating. And so when you determine to sit, so something comes up and you decide, I'm just going to burn, I'm going to let it burn. And the more you do this, the more confidence you get, the more capacity to burn, more capacity to surrender, to sit there, to allow stuff to come up. Comes up, you've got the urges, oh man, this feels like crap. I just got to get out of my skin. I got to move. I got to call somebody. I got to get on the internet. I need to drink. I need to smoke, whatever it is. But somehow you've developed the capacity that I'm gonna let this come up. I'm just gonna feel it. So it comes up, feels awful. Now there's different things I could say here, and I've kind of made some videos already talking about this, but an urge will come up, and it's kind of this soup of a bunch of things, the thoughts in the mind that are trying to distract you from it, telling you to seek relief, telling you to go to the addictive habit, and the thoughts of anger, and they shouldn't have done this to me, why did I do this, why did they do this, this was painful, this was awful. So you've got all this discursive stuff happening kind of at the uppermost level. And then below that, you've got all these sensations and feelings in the body. The more you can zero in on the feeling tone of a certain experience that comes up and penetrate that with your awareness, merge with that, be one with it, the faster the release is going to happen. And that release typically is crying. It can be the body shaking. This is where like Kriyas and Kundalini and energetic release, and that's the gold mine. If you can get into that state and allow yourself to cry, allow yourself to shake, kind of hug yourself if that helps. The body kind of has its own natural intelligence. What you need to do, kind of clench up, and again, curling up into a fetal ball can be helpful. Fetal position. And so you burn through it. The route out is in, the route out is through. It's not avoiding it through distraction. It's not dramatizing it. It's by feeling the uncomfortable sensations. If you had an awful experience, there's a reflection in your body. There's a reflection at all levels of experience, but the reflection in your body is where you access it, and it's like you're giving your body that comfort that you weren't able to have at that moment because you were overwhelmed, or you were embarrassed, or you were ashamed, or you were afraid. And so, yeah, you can let your body shake. Sometimes if you're driving and you've been having a lot of anger, you can access that and just let out a deep primal scream that can help. You can punch the air, you can punch things, but you are completing the circuit, if you want to say that, at an energetic level. You're allowing for that energy to move and to express and to move through you ultimately. You're healing it by feeling it. And if you're crying, you're doing it right. Not crying with like a narrative, but just, out of that pure sensation of you're welcoming back in this exiled, little bit of internal family systems language, I believe. This kind of split off part of yourself, you're welcoming that back in. And in order for that part to heal and to release and to integrate, you have to be willing to feel what's coming up. And that's what I mean by learning to burn. And because reality is layered from kind of a more dense surface level of the apparent physical world through, down through more and more subtle layers into more and more, abstract, subtle layers of energy, the more you can contact things at the energetic level, and at the felt sense level, that's really where the transformation is going to happen. And so that's the good news. That simplifies it enormously, because it's not about sorting out all the thoughts and analyzing and getting all of that in the right order. You heal at the deeper levels, and then everything becomes coherent downstream of that. Everything sort of, the superficial levels reflect distortions and dysfunction at the deeper level. So it's like you're going to the headwaters. You want to change the course of the stream. You go to the headwaters and you can just make slight adjustments, and it makes a big difference downstream. So if you can learn to go into the depth, into the feeling sense, and part of that is just accessing the sensations in the body. That's a good access point. It'll pay dividends, if you want to say it that way, but so that simplifies it enormously. That's one of those, it's not really a conceptual path, but that's one of those kind of frameworks or understandings that can be really helpful. The depth layers transform the upper layers, not the other way around. So that's the good news because it simplifies it. It's also kind of the bad news because it means you have to feel what you've been avoiding. But even that after a while can transform. It can become kind of reframed in your experience. Just like when you're getting a massage, you can have this recognition that when the masseuse goes into the really painful, like dead center of a knot, that is painful, but can become a kind of sweet pain or delicious pain, or you almost seek it out, or you reorient. You have a reorientation towards pain at that level because you know it's transformative. You know that pain is healing. And so kind of the neurotic patterns around pain avoidance can kind of subside a little bit, or even flip and reorient, where you're looking for that pain because out of compassion, out of a desire not to suffer anymore, you're going into hell. You're actively going into the depths to release that pain because you've gained some experience and confidence with the process. So learning to burn, that's a really good just phrase that kind of encapsulates the whole path, really. What you're doing is becoming a window through which hell can empty out, through which your pain can empty out. And as the gunk starts to loosen up, ultimately you're allowing for God's light to shine through you more. And it's shocking how much gunk, shadow material, repressed material is in there. We're a storehouse for so much stuff. So just don't be surprised. You will be surprised. It is shocking. It's not a good design, in my humble little human opinion here. I would engineer it very differently. I would make it more efficient. I don't understand why it's like this, but that's the path. Surrender, burn in the fire,